Good morning. Today I would like to present a guest speaker, Jill Glasband. Just a little bio on her. She says she married the mortuary, and she never thought that she would be in the mortuary profession until she married a gentleman from the Glasband family, and the family owns their own mortuary. They were founded, and they are the first Jewish mortuary west of Chicago. Back in 1912. She's been in the funeral service industry for several years, since 1972, and she is a past president of the County Funeral Directors Association and the California Funeral Directors Association, and the first woman president of the Jewish Funeral Directors of America. For the last 13 years, she has been at Hillside Memorial Park here in Los Angeles, and in which the last 12 years she has been the Director of Community Outreach. So if you please give a hand to Jill Glasband.
Good morning. Am I working? Yes. Jewish tradition. The person should not be left alone to die alone. It is very important for us to be surrounded by family and friends. Once the death occurs, the person is always to be carried feet first. It could be an old wives' tale, superstition, but the deceased person is not to see the world that they are leaving. And so we on the gurney, when we make the removal, they're carried feet first. When we take them from the chapel into the hearse, they go feet first. And when we take the casket out of the hearse, depending on the area, we try to walk them to the grave feet first. So, in the beginning, and this is very, very important, if you're dealing with a family that belongs to a synagogue, you always plan the service in conjunction with the rabbi. If the family says, I want the service Wednesday at 2, and then you call the rabbi and the rabbi says, I'm sorry, I have a meeting, it causes bad feelings all around. So it's very, very important that it's in consultation with the rabbi. If the family is unaffiliated, they do not belong to a synagogue, then you can arrange the funeral, and then you can contract with a rabbi who is comfortable with the service that the family has selected. And different rabbis will say yes to different services. Some families, if they are too far out of the box, the rabbis are not comfortable doing that service. The different movements within Judaism. And these do not specifically describe what kind of funeral they're going to have. With the Orthodox and the ultra-Orthodox, absolutely. Their world is absolute. But with other movements within Judaism, it's kind of like they take some, but they don't take all of it. So you cannot, if the family says they're conservative, you can't say, oh, you're going to do A, B, C, and D, but not E. So the Hasidic and ultra-Orthodox, and there's modern Orthodox, they really believe in having a funeral within 24 hours and sometimes the same day. Nowhere is it really written that it has to be 24 hours, but it has become custom. When you are out in a small town, when you were out in the desert, when you were in a village in Eastern Europe, there was no problem. Person died, someone went out, dug the grave. They are not dealing with modern society. They didn't have health departments that are closed for 4-day weekends for Thanksgiving. So, but as much as we can, we try to have funerals for them as soon as possible. They are the most traditional. They have the strictest doctrines. There are no gray areas in their world. And their world is governed by 613 mitzvot. And these are the rules. And of those 613, there are more thou shalt nots than there are thou shalts. And Orthodox Judaism is the most traditional expression of modern Judaism. Orthodox Jews believe the entire Torah, including the written, the Pentateuch, and the oral, the Talmud, was given to Moses by God at Mount Sinai and remains authoritative for modern-day life in its entirety. Hasidic Judaism rose in the 12th century Germany as a mystical movement emphasizing asceticism and experience born out of love and humility before God as an austere religious life. The modern Hasidic movement was founded in Poland in the 1800s, or in the 1700s, and is more commonly founded by Israel ben Eliezer, more commonly known as the Baal Shem Tov. So you have seen people with the black hats, the black coats, the payas. They're different kind of hats, and they represent different sects. And the sects do not always get along. You will never see them here. We rarely see them at Hillside. So it's just to tell you about them. Modern Orthodox follow most of the laws, but they do not dress differently, and they're part of modern life but still adhering to the keeping kosher and honoring the Sabbath and various other things that they do. The other movements are much more liberal. Conservative Judaism is a modern sect that seeks to avoid the extremes of Orthodoxy and Reform Judaism. Conservative Jews wish to conserve the traditional elements of Judaism while also allowing for reasonable modernization. Reform Judaism is the most liberal form of Judaism, whose mission is to create and sustain vibrant Jewish congregations wherever Reform Jews live. There's Reconstructionists, which is a progressive, contemporary approach to Jewish life, which integrates a deep respect for traditional Judaism with insights and ideas of contemporary social, intellectual, and spiritual life. They're generally what we used to call the humanistic Jews. So they believe how a person lives a life is really more important. They're Kabbalists, which are the mystical Jews, and they're even Jewish Buddhists. So across the spectrum. But if you keep in mind that only 35% of Jews are what we would call affiliated. Now that doesn't mean they belong to a synagogue. They could go to a family dinner once a year and consider themselves affiliated. But that leaves 65% of us totally unaffiliated. They may identify as Jewish, but they are what we would call non-practicing Jews. So they will come to you and come to us with some knowledge, little knowledge, or no knowledge whatsoever about Jewish funerals. They may remember something that Aunt Sarah did, and they will come into the arrangement saying they have to do that. And that's fine. If that works for them and it works for us, then we do it. But it is our job to give them enough knowledge about Jewish funerals so they are making knowledgeable decisions. So the customs of burying within 24 hours probably originated because of the climate they lived in. In biblical times, the climate surrounding Israel was very hot. This climate caused the dead body to decompose much faster. So it was generally understood that that's why you would bury a person as soon as possible. So that's how it became part of our Jewish tradition. Then there is another group of people who feel that they added a more, not mystical, but other meaning to it. And it was that the deceased would be embarrassed if he or she knew that you saw them in a state of decomposition. So that's why, we add other meanings to things as it goes along. And the practice of embalming or mummification was practiced in Egypt, but those techniques are considered disrespectful since it requires a great deal of manipulation and removal of bodily organs. And what we consider, when you embalm, the blood goes down the drain, and therefore the person is not buried whole. We believe, we're still on the first Messiah, we believe that when the Messiah comes, the person needs to be buried whole, therefore no embalming. Autopsies are kind of a gray area. No cremation, because there is no way, and there are different reasons. I'll tell you, I spent 3 days on this. I would ask a question, and I got 3 different answers. And that's the saying in the Jewish community. You have 2 Jews, you get 3 opinions. So no matter what I asked, all sorts of opinions. So at the arrangement, our job is to find out, and we're very hands-on with our arrangements. First of all, you plan the funeral in consultation with the rabbi. If there should be nothing set until the rabbi clears it. And then, as I said, if a family's unaffiliated, you plan the funeral and then you hire the rabbi that will fit in with that family. We ask what sort of preparation they're going to want. Traditional, or what we call traditional or secular. We always set features, dress and casket, and the family can view the unembalmed decedent. We have a curtain across the front of our chapels, and only the immediate family. We require one person to identify, but it can be the immediate family. There is absolutely, for us, no reason why that person can't be viewed. We even put makeup on. It works. A person looks fine. We ask them prior to coming into the arrangement to bring clothing, if that's going to be their selection, to bring a tallis, the person's tallis. And while cremation is frowned upon, we explain their options as far as cremation, having a cremation casket there, the deceased in the casket, or is it a memorial service? But we also explain to them that that really limits their choice of rabbis. Conservative rabbis will not officiate for cremation, and Orthodox, it's not even a question. The families won't, and the rabbis won't. So you have a crematory on your grounds. No Jewish mortuary or cemetery has a crematory. So we all have to send the person to another facility for that to be done. And we ask what type of service. Is it going to be in the chapel concluding at the grave, or crypt, or is it going to be graveside only? And all these things you know. And in addition to the normal information that you would gather, we get the names of the casket bearers, how many Shiva candles, where they're going to cut Kriya or have Kriya, and where they're going to be sitting Shiva. The days and the times of the minyan. And minyans are the morning and evening prayers, and generally the minyans are done at night. And it's usually at sundown. And at Jewish funerals, we make all the announcements. The funeral director makes all the announcements. Our clergy are there for one reason, to conduct the service. We are in charge of everything else. So when we ask them, do they want the Shiva candle, what type of interment space if they haven't purchased, or where is it? Because if we are hiring a rabbi for them, some rabbis do not want to go to a crypt. They want earth burial. So it's really important that you get the particulars for that particular family if you're going to have to contract with a rabbi. And then we, just like you, have all sorts of creative services. We could have a guitar player, we could have musicians, we could have, big thing for all of us is having speakers at services. Lots and lots of speakers. But that plays into the rabbi that you're going to contract with. And we've had families, the casket was escorted by a Dixieland band, horse-drawn hearse. All of these have to be okay with the rabbi. And if the rabbi says, no, I can't do that, feel free to go on and call another rabbi. You're not stuck with the one person that you call. So if the family says that they want traditional preparation, one of the things that we do is have a shomer. A shomer literally means guard. Some feel that they should have the shomer from the time of death until the time of burial. There is a feeling that the soul lingers around the body until the person is laid to rest. So the person is there. The prayers that they say are psalms, and it's keeping the body company. Years ago, it was needed because you had vermin. People didn't die in hospitals, didn't have mortuaries to bring the person to. They died, they died in this little village in Eastern Europe, and if the person was well-to-do, you literally had to have a guard because someone might take the deceased and hold them for ransom, or you had vermin. And if the person could not be buried until the next day because they died so late in the day that you couldn't dig the grave before dark, you really needed a person to sit with the body. And today we have people, shomers, who will be there from the time of death, follow the person in from the hospital, or just the night before the funeral, or whatever the time span that the family wants. We also ask if they want a tahara. The tahara is the only rule. Everything else is, well, I like to say, everything else is commentary. The tahara really is the only rule. People didn't die clean in antiquity. And now, even though they're in a hospital, when a person dies, their bodily fluids leave the body. Their functions stop. So the idea of a tahara is from Ecclesiastes 5:15. Exactly as he came, he must depart. And so it is a physical cleansing of the body. It's a washing. And the tahara itself is purification. So after the person is washed, fingernails, hair, toenails, and dried, then buckets of water are poured over them, or they are immersed in a mikveh, and then they are dried and dressed. So the people who do taharas or do the watching are part of what's known as a Hever Kadisha. It is a burial society, not the mortuary in West Hollywood. It is the highest act of what we call Gimilut Hasadim, acts of loving kindness, that can be done for the dead, for there can be never a question of repayment. And then we dress the person in shrouds, tachrifim. They are all white. It is not like the Shroud of Turin. It is an actual outfit. There are pants, and it's generally one size fits all, except now we have extra large, and we actually have some for children, unfortunately. There is what we would call a shirt, and then what is called a jacket. And the pure linen shroud is the one that is preferred to be used because it does not have decoration. Modern times, the pure linen shroud is too plain for some people. So we have other shrouds where there is braid for a man and lace for a woman. So it's a little more presentable. You can dress in shrouds without a tahara. You can have a tahara and dress in clothing. They prefer the whole thing goes together, but the world has changed. And because women do not wear a yarmulke, a kippah, they have a bonnet for their head. And with some groups, they will take the talit. The talit, I don't know if you're familiar with a talit. I forgot to bring one. There are 4 long strings. You cut one of the strings off. It's called a tzitzi. You cut one of the strings off, and you place it in the casket. That makes it unfit to be used for everyday prayers. So you can use it for the burial. With some groups, when they do the tahara, they will take the talit, and while it's around the person, they will also put it down over their face. So because women don't have that, they have a veil that goes over the face. And as more women wear yarmulkes and more women wear talises, it's a gray area if they're having a tahara, because these Orthodox women will not put a talis on a female. So it needs to be our people after the tahara is done. And then I know that you have Orthodox caskets here. You have some? Okay. We ask about if the family wants what we call a traditional casket, or any casket of their choice. Our caskets are, Orthodox caskets are wood. They can be any kind of wood. We have them up to mahogany, but they have no nails, they are pegged together, and they have non-animal glue. And the idea is you have no embellishment. So like some of the caskets on the ends, the corners, there will be religious symbolism or flowers or trees. I know the Batesville caskets had all these corners that you could order and place on. We don't have any of that. It can be a fancy corner, but it's not an embellishment. It's not something foreign that's not the wood itself. And some families want holes drilled in the bottom. We believe from dust to dust. So you don't embalm, you have a wood casket. The Orthodox will have holes drilled in the bottom. And with us, we have vaults that have holes in the bottom. They allow the casket and the person to come in contact with the earth. We don't believe in preserving. We are just literally the opposite. So that's one of the reasons we don't have embalming. So the tahara itself, I enclosed some pictures. And one of the things, the lower left-hand side is a mikveh. Some mortuaries in Canada and New York especially that deal with the ultra-Orthodox, they have one of these baths, for want of a better word, and after the person is washed, instead of the pails of water being poured over the person, they will put the person on a lift and dunk them in the mikveh. And then I showed you there are booties that are attached, and there are strings, and the knots that they tie are specific. You say certain prayers, they have certain loops. It's in each group of people that do it slightly different. There is no one way to do it. And then some people will say to you, well, my husband had a kittel. A kittel is the white robe, and generally it's when an Orthodox man is married, he wears the kittel, and then it is put away for their funeral. But it is not a complete garment. So we use the person's kittel, but then they need the rest of the clothing to go along with it. They just wouldn't use the jacket. And it's really hard for them to understand, but it really isn't a complete set of clothes. So the day of the funeral, we ask the rabbi to come early, we ask the family to come early, at least 30 minutes ahead of time. In that time span, they can view the person privately. And according to Jewish law, that the casket is kept closed from that point on. Again, it would be that the deceased would be embarrassed if they saw them in a state of decomposition. And there's another one, I had to write this down, but also enemies who view the dead, mocking their helpless state, which is something I learned. I didn't have that reason before. We all have family rooms, and it's become a trend now that families really don't want to sit in the family room. They want to sit with everybody else. Logistically, it's hard for funeral directors because people don't know funeral etiquette, and Jewish funeral etiquette is that you do not approach the family until you get back to the house. So if they're sitting out there with everybody else, and they don't want to be bothered, how are we as funeral directors going to keep everybody away because everybody wants to offer their condolences as they leave the chapel? It's really hard sometimes. Go over the names of the casket bearers. Our casket bearers are active. They do not sit separately. They do not wear gloves. They do not have boutonnieres. They sit with the family, and then they are called up by the funeral director at the end. We go over with them speakers, musicians, videos, and we also go over it with the rabbi to make sure the family hasn't put something in that the rabbi's really, really uncomfortable with. Has happened. And then with us, we ask, how do they want to exit the chapel? And when I came into the business, everyone walked by the casket and out the side door. And the idea was that that is the one time when you can make amends to the person. If there's anything I did in your life, I'm sorry. And some people will touch the casket and some people will just walk by. The new feeling among the clergy is that the funeral director makes the announcements, the casket bearers are called up, the casket is turned feet first to go out the door, not the side door, but out the main door. And then the casket goes out, followed by the immediate family and the rabbi, and then the rows fill in. So that allows families some privacy, especially if they're sitting in the front rows. And it allows a faster exit from the chapel, which is really helpful. We ask where they're going to do Kriya. So this is a Kriya ribbon. It tears. Some rabbis want to do it. It's put on the family when they get to the service. For children, it is over the heart. For spouses and siblings and anybody else, it's on the right-hand side. Some rabbis will gather the family together and they will say the little prayer and tear it before the service starts. Some rabbis want to do it at the grave. In Detroit, the funeral director does it. The rabbis have nothing to do with it. So it's just, when you have a Jewish service, you need to ask the rabbi when and where he wants to do it. And then, of course, the idea of the family coming early is, with us, there's always an issue before the service. We are an interesting demographic. There's always something going on, and there's always last-minute adjustments. We are a high-maintenance group. So as I said, the funeral director makes all the announcements. We have asked which way they're going to exit so that he can make the proper announcement, where they're going to sit Shiva, and I will go on and explain it, but you would give that the family is going to sit Shiva and that they are going to have the minyan at 6:30 at night, 3 days a week. Sometimes families split, sometimes families don't get along, so you have 2 sets of everything. Sometimes it's 1 night here and 3 nights there. You know, long ago when I started, you always went back to the deceased's house. No matter the condition it was in, you always went back to the deceased's house. You always had 1 Shiva candle. Everything was centered there. You know, 30 years, 40 years later, times have changed. And more than 1 person asks for a Shiva candle, and minyan services, it's all different. And then one of the things you need to ask is, there is a prayer at the end of the service. It's called the El Mole Rachamim. And generally, when the rabbi has everybody stand, you know that's when the prayer is coming. And that's going to be the last thing they do in the chapel. And then the rabbi will say, please be seated. And that's when we go up and make our announcements. But you need to check and see that the rabbi is actually going to do it in the chapel. Some only want to do it at the grave. So you need your cue when to come up, or the rabbi's through and nothing is happening. So as I said, with Jewish services, we really have to be proactive. Then we are going to the cemetery. Now, part of our tradition, I put in an Orthodox one in there just so you'd see. We lower the casket into the grave. We don't leave the casket on top and wonder when someone is going to come back and lower that casket into the ground and fill in the earth. The feeling of Gimilut Hasadim, acts of loving kindness, it's very important for us to go to a funeral. If I do a favor for Linda, Linda knows in the back of her mind, I owe Jill. But when a person dies, there is no way that that person is going to repay you. So you are going to the funeral as an act of loving kindness. You are escorting that casket to the grave, and you are lowering the casket, and you are placing earth in the grave. This is the last thing that you can do for that person. And part of the process, whether, some families agree with it, some don't, but it is hearing the earth, and we never call it dirt, hearing the earth hit that casket. That is a finality. And it's part of the Jewish process, because all of this leads up to then the family leaving and mourning. And that's also why we don't extend funerals. If we have a funeral and we have to wait a week, other than the next of kin being on a cruise or out of the country or something like that, then the family really can't begin their mourning. It's always out there because they don't have a funeral for a week or 5 days or 6 days. So that's why we may not do it within 24 hours, but the feeling is that you do it as soon as possible. And some rabbis make stops carrying the casket, but they want the families to stop on the way to the grave. So I looked this up. The symbolic stops are an expression of our unwillingness to leave the deceased. Some rabbis will stop 3 times, and many others will stop 7 times. During the 9th century, the procession stopped 7 times to shake off evil spirits clinging to those leaving the funeral. With each stop, a spirit was shed. Other scholars believe the custom of halting 7 times stems from the 7 references to the vanity of life mentioned in the book of Ecclesiastes. So some rabbis will do it, some will not. You just need to ask the rabbi, is this going to be part of what you do at a service? And then we put earth in the grave, as I said. Most of the time, it'll be either 1 or 3 shovels of earth. Even numbers are good luck in Judaism, so you put odd numbers in, if that's all you're going to do and not fill in the grave. And as I said, you place earth, you don't throw dirt. So I looked up the meaning of this, where this came from. Typically, when a Jewish funeral service has ended, the mourners come to fill the grave. Symbolically, this gives the mourners closure as they observe the grave being filled in. One Jewish custom is for people present at the service to place a shovel of earth, and you put it in the grave, place the earth in the grave, and then you put the shovel down. It is not that you are willing to do it. One of the feelings is you do not pass on grief from one person to another, but the meaning I heard way back when was that when you're filling a hole, you need to get this filled in. So you're shoveling, you hand the shovel to someone else when you get tired, and you're doing it with a purpose. By putting the shovel in the earth, you're doing something because you need to do it, but not because you want to do it. And some have, the custom is for the next of kin to take earth in their hands and put it in the grave. Sometimes with a vault, if it's a double depth, you want to put earth, a minimal amount of earth on the top of the casket because you're lowering it way down. It all depends on the cemetery setup. We have precast vaults in some sections, so the first burial is going way far down. Most rabbis feel now that if you put enough earth in to cover the top of the casket, you don't need to fill in the grave. Orthodox absolutely will fill in the grave and bring it level with the grass. And if it's a crypt, with our families, we will give them a bag of earth if the family wants it, if the rabbi wants it. And then this is a way to put earth on the casket, and it's not a lot of earth. So the immediate family, the rabbi will take some and sprinkle it on the top of the casket, and then the casket is placed into the crypt. Again, we place caskets in crypts as well as lowering into the ground. And then as far as I know, we are the only religion that actually has a point in the service, and I really don't know about other religions, where we turn from the deceased to the mourners. The deceased is taken care of, the earth has been placed in the grave, or the casket has been placed in the crypt, and we turn to the mourners. Most Jewish services, the rabbi will ask that the attendees form two lines. The immediate family leaves first and passes through that line, and then the rabbi will say in Hebrew, "May God comfort you among all the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem." And also, that way, families don't have to talk to people if they don't want to, and it gets them in their car, able to go home, to be there to greet people when they come to the Shiva house. On the other hand, you may have some families who want to stay and talk to people, and that's okay too. But know that the family is going to stay, so that if the rabbi wants to make two lines, you are able to tell he or she that the family wants to stay or wants to do this or wants to go visit other graves. The more knowledge we have as funeral directors, the smoother the service is going to run. So now the family has gone back to the Shiva house, to the house where they're going to gather for friends, with friends. So the first thing they do is light a candle. Burns for 7 days. Shiva actually means 7 days. Shiva in Hebrew is 7. If family comes from out of town, they will light the candle when they get home. You don't light it and then blow it out. Once you light it, it will burn. The door is left unlocked. You're not supposed to knock when you go into a Jewish home. It is left ajar. And the immediate family generally sits lower than anybody else, traditional families. I put a picture of a Shiva chair in there. It is only about 12 inches above the ground. And, or we tell families that they can take a pillow off the couch. It works. And then one of our traditions is that you wait for the mourner to talk to you. By your asking them questions, they have to have a conversation with you. And that may be the last thing they want to do. And not because it's you, it's just because they are grief-stricken. A meal of consolation is served. Now, generally, family and friends are supposed to supply that meal for you. The immediate family sits down first, you serve them, and once they're done, then everybody else eats. In that meal somewhere should be some round foods. An egg, rolls, cookies, signifying the circle of life. Any Jewish deli will give you a bowl of hard-cooked eggs. It's just part of what they do when you order food for Shiva. And then the minyan service would be at night. And as I said, those are the prayers morning and evening, and most people just do it in the evening. So for our families, and I will leave you a book, and if you photocopy it, just give Hillside credit. We have a prayer book that is in all the pews, has all the prayers. It's not just the Kaddish card that you give out, but it has all the prayers, for the service itself. We have, I believe, 2 23rd Psalms, the old one in gender sensitive. You know, it's a different world. In Hebrew, in English, in phonetic Hebrew. And then for the minion at home, we have these prayers. This is generally a very, very short service. And somebody leads it, and I don't read Hebrew that well, but as long as you're there. And that's the idea. You just go and show up. You may not understand anything, but you're just there. So going over after the funeral, I also looked these up. In Jewish tradition, a flame symbolizes the soul of man reaching ever upward. This is suggested by the verb in Proverbs 20:27, the soul of man is a lamp unto the Lord. So by lighting the candle and keeping it burning throughout the Shiva period, it is believed that the soul of departed is aided in its journey heavenward. So you've got these two different thoughts. The soul of the deceased, we are told when a person dies, goes to God. But when the Messiah comes, the soul is going to, there's a feel, it's called nefesh, the gelgul or something like that, where the soul rolls under the ground and will end up in Jerusalem. So if it's there, how can it be going this way? But like I said, we have many explanations for the same thing. So as I said, the Shiva candle is kept burning during the 7 days, and some groups will have a candle and burn it for 30 days or burn it for an entire year. We give away the first candles. If they want a year's worth, they have to buy them. And then the meal of consolation, the history of that, the first meal eaten upon returning from the funeral consists of hard-boiled eggs or other round or oblong foods. This is often credited to the biblical story of Jacob purchasing the birthright from Esau with stewed lentils. It is traditionally stated that Jacob was cooking lentils soon after the death of his grandfather Abraham. So we have all these different feelings, and lentils are okay to serve too. You know, if the family's vegetarian, absolutely. So I touched on the mourning customs. Shiva, as I said, means 7 in Hebrew. It is the deepest mourning period for traditional Jews. You wear the Kriya ribbon for 7 days, or in the Orthodox, they will cut some part of the clothing, and you wear that outer garment for the 7 days. You do not observe Shiva on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, but you're going to synagogue. So you can leave the house for that. Otherwise, the Orthodox do not leave the house. They do not go to celebrations. You are not supposed to hear music. You are in mourning for an entire year. Then there is Shloshim, which is the 30 days following the death, and it includes Shiva. That is a less mournful period. The families recite Kaddish, and that is in the card that you have. You recite Kaddish for 11 months. Traditional Jews will recite it every single day. And you recite it, but only for 11 months. And so how does that play when the mourning period is 12 months? According to Jewish tradition, the soul must spend some time purifying itself before it can enter the world to come. The maximum time required for the purification is 12 months. Even for the most, or 12 months for the most evil person. To recite Kaddish for 12 months would imply that the person was the type who needed the 12 months of purification. So to avoid this implication, the sages decreed that a son should recite Kaddish for only 11 months. And then we have what's known as an unveiling. And well, let me do the 1 year. At 1 year, you would light, where did we put it? A Shiva candle. And we give these away on the 1-year anniversary of the death and every year to follow, plus 4 holidays during the year. And on Yom Kippur, on Shemini Atzeret, the last day of Passover, and on Shavuos, also, you light a candle. Now, many families will observe the Hebrew date of death, which is a different calendar than the modern calendar that we follow, and it changes every year, so we give them a calendar when to light it. But most families just will do, as I said, the English date. And then we have what's known as an unveiling. I don't know if other religions have it, a dedication of the stone. In our tradition, you can mark the grave anytime after 30 days. That was allowing for much faster vendors in those days. But you have the unveiling or dedication service at the 12th month, at the first yortzeit. It can be self-led. Rabbis do not need to lead it. We have ceremonies where the families can do it. Unveiling ceremonies, while not required, have become traditional in Jewish tradition. And it is maybe a 10-minute service. It's, the 23rd Psalm, it's Kaddish, it's a couple things about the deceased person. The stone is covered. Now, in many parts of the world, the stone is covered for the entire time it's put on the grave until the unveiling. With us, it's just covered the day of the service. Families call, they set the unveiling, there's a little velvet thing that we put on the stone, and there's a place in the service where it is dedicated and you take it off. And then everybody always asks about stones on the markers or on tombstones. So I put some pictures in here to give you an idea of how it started. The grave is filled in. The grave was mounded. You have to fill it higher so that you let the air pockets come out and you let it settle through a few rains. People would then, on top of this mound, put rocks, big rocks. And when they came back to visit the grave, if any rocks were moved, they would put the rocks back, or boulders, small boulders, back. So through thousands of years, this has morphed into the stones that we place on graves. And it shows that you have been there to visit. We try, at least at Hillside, because we have flat markers, as do you, we have Jerusalem stone, and they're very small stones. Because if you put stones on a grave, and we do have some that are as big as pictured, when the groundskeepers come by, they become projectiles when the mowing machines and the weed whackers are coming by. It's difficult to keep that under control. So we, as a Jewish cemetery, we try to give them as much as they need, but keeping it so that we can still maintain the cemetery. Are there any questions? A lot of families come on the birthday. We have a service between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the first Sunday. When cemeteries were not as well kept, and even some, back east that are run by synagogues and pretty run down, before Rosh Hashanah, you go to the cemetery and literally clean. That has changed in Canada and in North America, Canada and the United States. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur on that Sunday, if the cemetery needs it, you clean the cemetery, clean around the graves. Or with us, we all have services. And for a lot of families, that is their major high holiday experience. They do not belong to a synagogue, so they are not going to high holiday services. So they are coming to Hillside, It is a 1-hour service, and that's what they have done for the year. And we have rabbis, and sometimes there's music. It all depends on the year, but every Jewish cemetery does it. Mount Sinai and Eden. You had a question. Absolutely, lift and all. But we make the family aware of it. It's going to be noisy. You're going to see the bottom of the casket. So you bought this wood casket, and sometimes you see pine with knots on the bottom. You know, as long as you explain everything, then they can opt for yes or no. And then some families will take little, well, all of our crypts have little lips. So they'll have tiny stones on it. Eddie Cantor is at Hillside, and he always has dimes. He met with FDR about the polio epidemic, and he was the one that coined the term March of Dimes. So people always come by and leave dimes. He's right next to Jack Benny. Next at Jack Benny's sarcophagus, they put pennies because he was supposed to be so stingy, so he has lots of pennies. Yes. Yes, we believe in pre-planning. Some do. Like everybody else, they don't, you know, a lot of people are in denial. But it is not considered a bad luck omen. That, you know, you're not going to die sooner if you pre-plan. Most people will buy their plots, not necessarily their mortuary, but they will buy their interment space because they want to be where their family is. My whole family happens to be at Hillside, then I went to work there. It was really a coincidence. But other families want to be at the cemetery of heritage. And it's really interesting. I don't know how you're finding it, but with the younger people, there's not that much interest in that. It's the boomers on up, but the younger ones, different world. And we're going to have to adapt. You know, we had people that would only buy graves. Now we sell boulders for cremated remains. It's a different world. We sell a lot of metal caskets. Metal is the way traditional Jews feel, metal is an implement of war, and metal does not allow the person to go back to the earth. They're encased in a casket. The metal caskets that we sell, they are, I think we only have 2 that are gasketed, but we rarely sell them. We have 9 or 10 traditional caskets from the very plain minimum all the way up to the mahogany, and we have 5 or 6 other woods. You know, they're hinged, so there's metal in the casket, but they're still wood. So we don't sell metal very often, but families, I had it when I was at Glasband, that a person was shipped in from a foreign country in metal, and we took them out of that casket and placed them in a wood casket. A lot of interfaith families, we've been, you know, Hillside has had to change as the world has changed, as the definition of a family has changed. And Hillside was started, so that's my background, is Glasband was the first Jewish mortuary west of Chicago. We did a lot of Orthodox business. But then the world, the neighborhood around us changed. And when Hillside was started in 1941, we always buried in Boyle Heights, we own Mount Carmel Cemetery, and Agudath Achim and Mount Zion, and all these old Orthodox cemeteries with cement on the ground and big tombstones. And in 1941, Jews were assimilating. There were a lot of interfaith couples. They were in the movie business. It was a different, changing world. So Hillside was started not with cement on the graves and the big tombstone. Hillside was started as a memorial park with grass because we didn't want to be different. We wanted to be like everybody else. So Hillside was started 180 from the old cemeteries. We didn't require, some of the old Orthodox cemeteries required traditional preparation. You didn't necessarily need to belong to the synagogue that owned the cemetery, but you still had to have Tahara and Tahrichim. And Hillside was for the rest of us. They always allowed interfaith families. They always did. Hillside always started as a more inclusive cemetery, no matter how you identify as Jewish. Orthodox, it's only through the mother. With us, if you self-identify, the father's Jewish, the husband's Jewish, you're Jewish. For the family, right? Not the deceased. Okay. And like you, when families bringing their own clothing, we ask, for the deceased, we ask them that it be high collar and long sleeves, because you have bruises. And especially if we're not embalming, you're not going to put makeup on the arms. We can do some on the face, but it's not a full thing that we do if a person's embalmed. So you want to make the person as presentable as possible, and therefore you bring clothing that will cover as much as possible.